Hi everyone and welcome to my studio. I'm Shelley Pryor and today I want to work on a little watercolor magnolia painting. Okay, here's the finished painting and we're going to need a few supplies for this. For most of my painting I'm going to be using a number 12 round brush, has a good point, and a number 8. The watercolor paints I'm going to be using are permanent rose, raw sienna, sap green, perylene green, cobalt, and indigo. The brand I'm using is DaVinci, but you should be able to pretty much substitute any other brand that you like. You want to have 2 water containers, and I'm using Arches 140-pound cold press, to which I have mounted onto an 8 by 10 piece of masonite. And I will list all of the supplies in the description below. So you won't have to remember that or write it all down. I've got it written down for you. Alright, so I have taken my line drawing and transferred it onto my watercolor paper. And I'm going to begin by working on the dark background. For this technique, we're really going to be using a very wet in wet technique. That's so that we have this beautiful seamless transition between this peachy color here and the darker indigo. So first of all, I want to mix up my paint colors. On my palette, I'm going to use just a little raw sienna, and I'm going to mix that with permanent rose, and I'm going to make a fairly good sized puddle because I don't want to have to stop halfway through in order to mix paint. So I'm going to make a good sized puddle of that. That's raw sienna and permanent rose. More permanent rose than raw sienna because I want to keep it still on the pink side. I don't want to make it too orange. I have indigo over here in my corner, and I have softened up the paints on my palette in order to keep them really fresh, where I can get really good rich color. You can see that even though this is very fluid, it's rich with color. You cannot get that when you have dried paint on your palette and that you're trying to make a puddle from. So make sure that you're either using fresh paint or you have soaked your paint a little while by putting enough water on it to soften it up. Okay, over here I have perylene green, and again you can see that I have a good rich puddle of that. I'm not going to be using that for a while though. But I will be using some cobalt, so I'm going to make a good rich puddle of that as well. Again, you want to have lots of pigment going on. You don't want a really watery effect for this background because it's quite dark. Alright, so I think I'm going to need a little bit more of the indigo, so I'm going to make sure I've got a generous sized puddle for this because I have a big area to cover, and as I said, I don't want to stop in the middle to start mixing paint. Alright, I will be working on a dry surface, and the reason I'm working on a dry surface is because I don't want water on the surface to dilute any of the color that I'm putting down. I want to have good rich color. I'm going to be working very wet on dry. So I'm going to begin in one corner and I'm going to progress my way around, changing my color as I go so that one color can blend into the next one. As I apply my color, I'm not going to brush it on. As soon as I touch the paper, and I'm using a very, very gentle touch here because if my paint is runny enough, as soon as the brush touches the paper, it will start to flow. I'm going to zoom in for this so that you'll be able to see how the colors are going to blend into each other. I'm going to work counterclockwise. And lots of good rich color there, and very fluid. I can actually see it shining on top of my paper. So that's what I'm after. Now, I'm not carrying the blue all the way around, and I'm not going to outline my piece because I want one color to flow into the next. Now I've rinsed my brush. I'm switching over to the peachy color that I've created. And you can see how runny, hopefully, how runny this is. And you can see I haven't touched them yet, but as soon as I do, as soon as those two colors touch each other, they will do the blending that I can't do with my brush. I could do it with my brush, but it's going to look like I did it with my brush. So I'm just going to allow the two colors to melt into each other. All right, so I'm going to take my color, and you can see the paint flow. That is so crucial to getting the colors to blend seamlessly when you have two wet colors. Back to my indigo, and again, when they touch, you should see the paint flow. Right. Of course, they do have to touch, but the paint is really very fluid. It's hard to emphasize that enough if this is kind of a new technique to you. Okay, I'll zoom out so that you can see as I work my way around. Every time I change my color, I will give my brush a nice rinse. And I'm going to put my color down a little deeper than I want, because I have to always keep in mind that when the paint dries, it's going to dry about 20% lighter. So I'm going to put it down a little heavier than I actually want it in the end. And slow down as I work up to the line, because I really want to get some clean lines here. If you're more of a loose painter, that's not so crucial, but I like to keep the lines nice and clean. So I'm going to switch now. I'm going to put in a little bit of cobalt. Once again, when these two wet colors touch, they will instantly blend into each other. My brush is full. It's got lots of pigment in it. Which is why you need a really good size puddle. When I say a full brush, I have a brush with a good size belly on it, so that it can hold lots of pigment and lots of paint. Now, on the other side of this petal right here, the background will continue. So I have to make sure that this peachy color is also here. If I took this down into the indigo, it really wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I want the color to continue behind, and so I will carefully paint that in. Now, if you have a little trouble with the big brush working into some of these spots, by all means, just come in with your smaller brush and tidy it up. But I like to use the big brush. For me, it's just easier. Okay, so put lots of really fluid paint down there. When you do a background like this, you really need to just begin and keep going. You can't stop in the middle. If I were to stop in the middle, this line would dry, and then I would never get rid of that hard line. So always keep that in mind. I'm going to touch the two of them, and they will automatically blend. If you wanted to, you could even tip your piece to help gravity bring the colors back and forth and help them mingle, but mostly I find that if it's just wet enough on the surface and that all your paint colors are the same consistency, that they will blend themselves very nicely. Okay, so I'll continue with this indigo. I'm going to switch. You hear me rinsing every time I switch colors here. Put some of the cobalt in there. Just offer a little bit of variety in lighter areas within my background. Keep it interesting. Back to my indigo. And again, I'm barely touching the paper. My brush is full, and so I've got lots of paint to spread around here. There we go. And I like to turn my piece so that I'm not putting my hand in paint. I slow down as I come up to my lines. And I've planned this out, so in my head I know exactly what I'm going to be doing as I'm applying this background. I'm not making that up as I go, so I'm able to work quickly. I always find the best idea in watercolor is to think it through, take your time to plan it, and then execute your plan quickly. So applying the watercolor in this manner allows things to blend beautifully. I might be applying it a little bit darker than I want in the end because I have to keep in mind it's going to dry about 20% lighter. So I apply it accordingly. I put my color down nice and rich. I'll put some more cobalt in there. And these two colors just blend nicely. And back to cobalt. But I'm not going to take the this dark indigo down into this point here because I want to make sure that this sort of glow of that peach color is going to continue behind these petals here. So I'm going to come in here with this peachy color and allow that background to look like it's continuous. Okay. All right, so I have one more section to do. And again, that peachy color has to continue down into this area so that it looks like a continuation of the background. I don't want to switch colors, that looks a little odd. And again, very, very fluid paint. Switching to the indigo. I'm going to come up, and as soon as those two colors touch each other, they will blend together. Just splattered a little bit. Take that off later. Alright, so I continue with the indigo, and they touch and they blend each other. Alright, so a little bit more peach up in here, I think, and then it's time to leave this alone and allow it to dry. Of course, I have to allow everything to dry in order for me to work on the flower, because anything that I touch on the flower at this point will touch that wet paint and the paint will flow. It's very wet, this background, but because of its wetness, it allows everything to blend nicely. Okay, so I'm going to blow dry this and I'll be back. Okay, I'm back, and I have actually dried my background, and I decided that it had dried a little bit lighter than I wanted, so I repeated all the first steps that I just showed you. Now I have given myself clean rinse water. I've given my brush a good thorough rinse because I don't want any of those dark colors into my petals when I'm working on them. Now I will be working on the flower itself, and I'd like you to take a good look at a couple of things that are happening in one of these petals. For example, there's a shadow on this side of the petal, and there's another shadow over here. They're different shadows. This one, because it's soft edged, sort of describes the shape of the petal, all right? The fact that it is round. Right, so we have a very soft blue shadow here that it's hard on this edge, although on this edge, there is no edge. It actually just fades into this white area here. This cast shadow is quite different. So this one has a hard line. So these are indications of what type of technique you should be using and when. In order to do this petal, I'm going to wet the entire petal, except for these white edges. Okay, I will not wet those edges with clean water. Then I will apply this blue shadow and this pink area here. And what happens is that because this area will be clear water, this edge will just fade into the clear water. This shadow I will leave, and I'm going to do that one separately because I need to do this shadow on dry in order to achieve these crisp edges. All right, so those are very important differences between the shadows. So I'm going to take my clean brush, and I'll start with the largest petal because I think it's the easiest one to demonstrate here. And except for those white edges, I'm going to use clean water here. And you'll be wanting to paint with your water as carefully as you would as if you were working with paint, because the paint will follow wherever the water goes. And if you're sloppy about your application of water, then your paint is not going to be in control. So I slow it down and I work carefully. It's sometimes hard to see where you're painting because of because it's got no color. But if you tip it in the light, you can see what's wet and whether or not you've missed a spot. Right, so I'm just going to continue down into this little spot in the corner there, and work my way up. Now, I was tipping that so that you could see where I have applied the water, and I want you to see the shine that is on the surface of the paper. It needs to be everywhere. It's a little bit dry down in here, so I'm going to apply a little more water. But the idea is to get a uniform sheen throughout the petal. Okay, got a little bit of a... So I'm using my brush to distribute the water evenly so I can control where I'm putting it. If I have a puddle somewhere, of course the water, all the paint is going to pool there or bleed into that spot more than I want it to. So I'm going to be using permanent rose here. And I'm going to be putting some fairly strong color down here in the bottom. And you can see how it starts to instantly flow where the water was. And I actually want that to happen. That's going to give me the smoothest application of color. Avoid any brush marks. Now, where it comes up into the bowl or the spoon type section here, I want to stop the color. I'm going to apply a little bit extra color here. A little bit more of this pink color in that section there. I'm going to rinse my brush and I'm going to pick up some cobalt. And with cobalt, I'm going to come around this edge here, and you can see how the paint flows. And it will blend into the pink. I can even tip my piece to help it to flow, but it's going to do a pretty good job all on its own. Going to soften this just a little bit just by tickling it with my damp brush, not a wet brush, a damp brush. And if you see paint flowing where you don't want it, you can simply tip to redirect it. And if you have too much color in one area, perhaps you're working on a piece that, or on a piece of paper that hasn't been glued down the way this one has. And if you see anything puddling, what you can do is to take a piece of paper towel and wick up the excess color by barely touching. Now I want you to see that I've only just used the corner here. I'm not blotting. But I think if I leave this alone, I think it's going to dry beautifully. I'm not going to try to correct. You might see these little spidery bits of paint that works its way into the white area. I'm not going to bother with that. That's all going to soften as it dries. When you've done a lot of this, you get a better idea of what will soften and what won't. But the paint, remember, you have to have the paint nice and fluid in order for this to work. I think I'll put a little bit more pink down here in the bottom, and it's time to leave that petal alone. So I won't be able to work on the petal right beside it because of course it's wet. I have to jump around and work somewhere else. So I think I'll go over here to the left hand side and work on this petal here. I'm going to tip this just a little bit. Right, so I'm going to put a little bit of pink, or first I'll wet the section. The reason I'm wetting this section, but I did not wet the background before putting it on, is because in the background I wanted good rich color. Here I want to have a lot more subtlety and delicate color. So wetting it first buys me a little bit of time, but it also will help the paint to flow. And again, I'll take that section and I will take a look at the shine. Okay, it looks pretty even, there's no puddles. Now I can start to apply my fluid paint. Now if you're trying this technique and you're finding that the paint isn't flowing, you probably don't have your paint fluid enough. So you may have to add a little bit more water to it. I'm going to switch over to my cobalt here and apply cobalt on the upper part of this petal. And I'm coming back to my indigo here, and I'm going to tuck some indigo down here in the point because it's more in shadow. Oh, put my finger in the paint. I'll have to fix that up. Take this off because I put my finger in it. I can work on that a little bit later. So put more indigo down here just to deepen that a little bit more. Got to remember that things are going to be drying lighter, about 20% lighter. It's kind of good that I stuck my finger in there because it gives me an opportunity to show you what I would do to correct something like that. I have a little piece, this is a little piece of Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, and I'm just dampened it slightly, and I will just very gently lift off that color. Trying to be careful not to hit the previous paint. Okay, so that'll be enough. And so no harm done there. And now I can work on another petal. I have to work on one again that is not in contact with another petal. So I'm going to skip around my petals one by one. And I think I'll work on this one up here. I will wet the area except for the edge. Most of these petals on this particular type of flower have kind of a curled edge, so they're a little bit white. I'm going to take a little of my cobalt here. Apply a little color there. So I think I'll put a little tiny bit of pink into this. Just down here in the corner. All right, that's a little more interesting. I can switch over. I think I'll do this one in the middle here. So clean water again. I'm using this this larger number 12 brush. It's the same brush that I used for the background. I like to paint with just the tip of it sometimes, but you could switch to a small, like little bit smaller brush here if you're more comfortable with that. Just provided you put enough water down. Okay, spread it around evenly. Okay, look for the shine. Okay. And again, it's going to be cobalt. And permanent rose for the pink. Got a little more cobalt on here. And the two will blend so nicely. All right, so I can leave that. Alone, and I will move over to another petal. I'll work on this little one over here. So I have to keep jumping around, skipping petals. And again, I'm not painting right to the edge on this one because I need to have that little bit of white around the edges. If I wet the entire petal right to the edges, my paint's going to go there and I will lose that white. So I have to be careful about that. A little bit of pink here. All right, moving around, I'm going to come back down and I think I will work on this petal here. There's a cast shadow on this particular one, but it's a specific shape right in here. So I'm not going to wet the entire petal in this case, I'm only going to wet this section here. So I start with clean water. I will go right to the edges in this case because the petal is flipped the other way and you don't see how it curls back on the opposite side because of the angle of this particular petal. It's important to be observant when you are applying these colors and not just treat every petal the same, because you will find that because of angles and perspective and different things that happen as petals come towards you or go away from you or whatever, that the shading, the highlights, the treatment of every petal will be a little bit different. So just because it's another petal doesn't mean it's going to be treated exactly the same. You have to look at every single petal that you do and apply the colors accordingly. I'll be putting some pink down here in the throat of the petal. And as I apply these colors, they are the blue paint and the pink paint are the same consistency. That way I can ensure that they will blend together properly. If one is wetter than the other or drier than the other, they will not blend evenly, so you won't get that smooth blend. I can work on this little section below because, as you can see, there's this white that separates each of these sections. I can wet it. Probably could just, and this is a small area and it's basically pink, so I could just put down the color without actually wetting it first. But just to be consistent, I'm going to wet it first. Right, and I put my pink in. You can see how the color explodes. This term of putting the color in and having it flow like this, it's called charging in your color. And just trying to clean up my edges here. I want nice tidy edges. Okay. A tiny bit more color. Okay. So I will leave that alone. And I'm going to come up here to work. I'm going to turn it so I don't put my hand in wet paint again. And I will wet with clean water, except for the edges. This petal up here. Okay, and look for the shine. Okay, see I have a little bit of a puddle here. I'll blot my brush and just drink a little bit of that up. Because I want it to have the same shine on the entire area that I want to work in order for the surface of the watercolor paper to accept the paint properly. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit pink down in here, tucked into this corner. I'm always a little bit fussy about making sure these points are actually points, because you want this to look like it tucks properly in behind the petal in front. So I'm always a little bit fussy there. It's going to be a bit blue over here. A bit more pink up here, I think. And a little bit more pink throughout, I think. All right. If too much color goes down, more than you want, simply blot your brush and drink up. Use your brush as a blotter and actually drink up the extra color. Okay. With so many petals to do, we've always got a place where we can move to. Right. I'm going to do this little petal up here. It's not much to it. It's just a small section. A little pink in here, and a little bit of blue as well. Such a small section, you're really not going to need a lot of color here. If you fill up your brush the same for this little tiny area as you did for this section, you don't really overwhelm that area with too much paint. So keep that in mind. Okay, we can work on this little triangle up here. I'm getting it on my background. Okay, now as I apply this color, I want to make sure that the value of what I put next to it isn't going to be exactly the same as this petal here. Otherwise, it will not look like two separate petals. So I want to put a little bit more blue here so that you can really tell that those are separate petals. A bit of pink at the top. Okay, the two mixed and became a little bit purple, and that's fine. All right. It's not a huge amount of difference there, but there is enough that you can tell that they're separate petals. I'll do the same thing down here. Really such a small area. Bit of blue towards the bottom. A little bit of pink towards the top. Now for all these subtle colors, of course you don't want to have, you want to have a lot of water in your mixture when you're picking up your paint, because it's got to be a lot more diluted in order to be soft and subtle. And finally we have this larger petal here. I can work on this because there is a separation of white between this petal that I just did and this one here. So I'll be able to do that as long as I don't wet right up to the edges. Again, this is clean water. Painting carefully. And I like to distribute the water evenly. Now I'm deliberately going to leave a spot that I'm missing so that you'll be able to see how important it is to sort of take the moment and turn it in the light to check this stuff, because you'll see, I think, okay, can you see a little spot right here where I have missed with water? That means that when I put the paint down and it dries, that little hole will end up being white and it will show. So it really pays to take the moment to turn your piece into the light to see if you've missed any spots and if that sheen is uniform. That satin sheen will tell you whether or not the paper is adequately saturated and prepared to accept the paint. Alright, so I want to go back to my permanent rose here. I want to use fairly strong color. Down in here you can see the paint is charging into that wet surface. And I want to go up to just about the bottom of the bowl shape. Okay, with a little bit of extra paint, I'm going to make it a little bit deeper right here and perhaps at the bottom as well. Sort of really create that spoon shape. Right, now I'll switch over to my cobalt, and I will come in along this right hand edge. Don't be alarmed when you see it go down and it's all exploding in directions that you may not want it. These things all soften up in the end. You can always use gravity, as I'm doing right here, to help these colors mingle and blend. And the result is that this blending that happens with the wet surface is far better than anything you could possibly do with your brush. And the gravity, by changing the direction, you can alter the direction of the paint flow. So using gravity, I'm able to direct. Okay, I'm back, and now that the petals have completely dried, I'm going to be able to add in the darker cast shadows, these ones right here. And I'm going to use a little bit of cobalt mixed with indigo for this, because I would like it to be a little bit darker than the just the cobalt by itself. And once again, I'm going to be using fairly fluid paint for this. And I'm simply going to be painting on dry. I'm bringing it down. Looks quite dark right now, but it will dry a little bit lighter than this. Okay, I'm going to bring it down to about where the pink is. Then I'm going to give my brush a good rinse. I will blot it once. And with clean water now, I'm going to come up to and meet the paint that I've put down. And what will happen here is that this was now going to flow into the wet area that I've just applied. And then this cast shadow will blend into where the water is, and it will end up being seamless. Just about like that. All right, so I will do the same thing on this petal here. Working on dry. Get a little bit more paint here. The paint has to be fluid enough to be able to blend into the clear water. So I'm rinsing one blot, and I'm coming up from below. I'm going to turn this so you can see it a little bit better. Coming up from below with clean water, and as soon as the water hits that paint, it softens and it will blend into the rest of the petal. That way I can have a soft edge while maintaining these harder edges where I want them. Okay, so I will need to put on a little bit of veining on these petals as well, but I'll have to allow this to dry before I can go ahead and do that. Meanwhile, I can come down to where the stem and the calyx are and start working on that. Okay, I'm going to take some sap green, fairly light, and apply it on the entire area here. And I'm going to have it fairly light because I want it to look like highlight. This is sap green. And I will simply paint in the entire section. Just trying to be careful here. All right, so I need to allow that to dry. I can speed it up a little bit with the blow dryer, and I'll be right back. Okay, here we are with both those cast shadows and the stem and calyx now dry, and I want to add a bit of shading to the calyx and the stem, so I'm going to come in here with this perylene green. If you don't have perylene green, you could also take some of your sap green and mix a bit of permanent rose into it, and you'll get a very dark green from that. Alright, so I'm going to take my perylene and simply paint in where my shadows are here. Most of it's on the right hand side. I'm going to quickly rinse and blot my brush. And just so you can see this a little closer, I'm going to zoom in, and while this green is wet, I'm just going to take my damp brush and just touch the edge that I want to soften up a little bit. I can rinse and blot. And I'm just touching that edge. And that will make this soften up very nicely. Okay, a little bit. I'll just show you, I'm not actually loading up my brush a whole lot here. I'm taking a little bit of this perylene green. And I'm creating my shadows with this. Okay, the deeper your shadow, the more sunlit your object will look. So I'm going to, once again, I've rinsed and blotted my brush. I'm going to come along the edge of that green with my damp brush. I want to emphasize that I'm using a damp brush, not a really wet brush. And that will soften up that edge. And I can soften up those edges as long as the dark green is still wet. Once it starts to dry, you can't move it as much. So Deepen this just a little bit more. Okay. A bit more shadow right in here. Okay, so I'm going to leave that alone. I'll zoom out, and you can see that we're pretty close to done here, with the exception of the little veins that are in each of the petals. Okay, you can see that there's a very prominent one down the center, and then smaller ones as on either side. But we also have to always keep in mind these are not straight lines. They are also going to follow the contour of that petal. Now, in order to make these look like veins and not stripes, I need to make sure that my paint is not too solid. So I'm going to dilute it quite a bit. I have now switched to a little bit of a smaller brush. I'm using an 8 round at this point. And I'll start with the main vein that goes down the middle. And you'll notice that my paint is pretty diluted. And I follow the contour, pressing a little bit harder as I reach the middle part, and it allows it to go from a point and taper out a little bit, and then taper at the other end as it comes down. So I will add in some more, and every time I add in one of these, I'm going to follow the contour. It's shaped like a lot like a light bulb would be. Narrows at the neck. Now this one on the left, again, it bumps out where it's biggest and comes back in. And I'll just continue adding my little veins. And they have to follow that contour, so they change direction. And that completes our magnolia. To finish it off, as I did with this one in the frame, I have applied a few coats of the Dorlands Wax Medium with a soft cloth. It is a protective surface. You'll see that by putting some water on here. The water really is unaffected. The paper, I should say, is unaffected by the water because the wax medium protects it. So you can see that it can actually bead up just like it would on your car, and that gives me a protective finish. So it allows your piece to be protected and washable, and you're able to frame it without glass and matting. Zoom back out. That's the finished frame one, and there's the one that I just finished. Hope you enjoyed the project, and we'll see you for the next one. Thanks for watching.